Okay, hi Julia, how are you?
I'm fine today. How are you?
Doing great, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. Always nice to have another Coleman on the show. I always enjoy that. Thank you so much. So, you're here to talk about your book. Your book is called When Depression is Silent. Have you written other books or is this your first one?
This is my first book.
Okay, why did you decide to write a book?
I decided to write When Depression is Silent as a commitment to use my transformation and deliverance by God. During this season of restoration of depression, there are so many people that are experiencing depression, and I am adamant and dedicated to helping change the community by raising awareness to the people about the silence of depression and how it affects others. And I personally share in the book When Depression is Silent, I share how I went from I used my mental incarceration, and I was delivered to the physical incarceration, and it's a transformation and how God delivered me through it all.
So, you had bouts of depression or suffered from depression yourself?
Yes, it's described throughout the book of when the family values that I started out with. I grew up in a middle family community, middle class family, and my family failed to realize that I was depressed. I isolated myself. I was bullied throughout school and laughed at and picked on, and it just continued to grow. It went undetected and undiagnosed, and it I ended up in relationships that were toxic due to the depression, low self-esteem, and eventually I ended up physically incarcerated.
Physically incarcerated in prison or in a hospital?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay. The one interesting thing about depression is that your title is very fitting because a lot of times people don't really have an understanding of the seriousness of it. They say, oh, they're just depressed, they'll get over it, they'll pop back. But when people go into deep states of depression, sometimes it can last for months, years, where you just don't even want to get out of bed. I have been there. I have done that. And, after a while, I got through it. But it took some medication, and then I got off the medication. And so I know that feeling. And people, I think, have a real misconception of what depression really is. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree. And growing up in the generation that I grew up in, and probably my mother and grandmother and the generations behind there, those were those skeletons in the closets. And they used to say, oh, that child has the devil in them, when there was actually some underlying depression laying behind that. And so, as these generations continue to grow, and here we are in 2021, it used to be a secret. That was that embarrassing thing that happened in households. But today we see we've got to talk about this depression. We got to get these children counseling, even at a very early age, start addressing it. And maybe we can keep it from escalating into the physical incarceration, bad decisions, and things that I experienced.
So, what was it that got you out of your depression or started you on the road to recovery? Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes, again, I give details, specific details in the book, but I had no idea that I was depressed. I didn't have any history of, previous family members or anything like that. And so I was in a very abusive marriage. My first marriage was very abusive. And Douglas, God did for me what I could not do for myself, and that was get out of that relationship. And because of low self esteem, no self esteem, and all those things I had lost due to the mental depression, I ended up in a life of crime. And it was there that I was placed in a prison for 10 years. And I ended up, the mental disorder only got worse. I went into the actual suicidal attempts and that nature of the depression. And at that point, that was when I was able to get help. They placed me in mental health housing, and they put me on medication. I began therapy, counseling, and at that point, I started learning different ways of coping. And so it's very important that we identify, we're aware that there's a problem, identify it, and get help.
Was your family a religious family? Did you grow up in a religious family?
I would not say they were religious, but we went to church every Sunday. So I wouldn't say that they were religious, but my family values are really funny, and they're identified again in the book. I'm very transparent about my parents and the relationship that we had with God. I grew up knowing that there was a God, but I did not know God like I do now. And that's been very inspirational and in implementing it into my life today. And that's who you have today. That's the person that I am. God is forming me to be today.
Well, that's great. It's funny about going to church because as a kid, I was taken to church by my grandfather, and it was more like a social club. You'd go in, you'd
Yeah.
hear the sermon, and then after that, everybody would go eat in the dining room, and it was potluck. Everybody just brought food, and you'd eat and you'd talk, and the little kids. I was just a little kid, and I just run around with the other little kids playing. Go outside if it was in the summertime. I don't think the message ever got through to me. And to this day, I'm not a particularly religious person, although I'm open to it. I love reading about all the different religions in the world because they all kind of hit on the same thing. They really do overlap, even though politically there can be disagreements and problems with the religions. They do sort of overlap in one way or another. And I think the message is good. I think that finding something beyond this world can be a savior, literally, for a lot of people. And I think in your case it was, yeah?
Yes. And for me, I don't practice religion. I practice relationship, my relationship with God. And that has made the biggest difference because, as I said, as a child, I grew up in church. And back in those days, I can't remember anybody telling us, teaching us to read the Bible and those sorts of things. But that's what religion is supposed to be about. But I focus more on my relationship with God, getting to know God, getting to know God's plan for me and my life, and that is making me a better person today.
I know I'm working backwards here, but on your bio, there's a talking point that I want to hit on. And it says the steps to identifying signs of depression and mental disorder. I think we touched on this a little bit where people don't really have an understanding of when somebody is in a serious depression state. What are some of the signs that you would, if you were watching somebody else or yourself, to say, maybe this isn't so good. Maybe this is more serious than just having a bad day or a bad week. What are some of the signs?
So if I insert myself personally into that space and from my parents' eyes, the first thing is isolation. When you notice, and we'll start out with children because that's sometimes where it begins. So if you see that your child is isolating themselves, I'm the middle child of three. I have two brothers, and even though I didn't have a sister, I still isolated myself, and I didn't really play with my brothers. I kept to myself and just withdrawn. I think isolation and withdrawal are two very important factors. Sometimes children, when they're having behavior issues, and we as society will label them as troubled kids, but no, sometimes there's something mentally going on. So I think behavior issues are another reason to identify. It doesn't hurt to take a person, whether they're a child or an adult, to counseling when you start noticing them think. But those are the three things that I think are very important in identifying mental disorders is number one, isolation, withdrawal, behavior, changing behaviors. I think those are very important places to start with, hey, maybe there is something going on.
What do you do with somebody who's resistant to it? Because a lot of people, if you said, hey, you've been just staying in your room for the last week? What's going on? Is everything okay? And a lot of times the answer you'll get will be, yeah, I'm fine. Just leave me alone. I'm fine, right? How do you impress on that person that there may be something more serious?
Observation. So on that day, once you have that conversation with them, I would start observing them and their behavior. You'll see something that changes because as the mental, and you said previously haven't suffered with some of the mental disorders or depression, then you know that it kind of gets worse. So it may start out just a little. I'm great. I'm fine. But their actions will start showing you differently. And so when you start seeing, I wouldn't wait too long, that something has changed. Hey, I know someone that might, let's see if you want to talk to them. Maybe you feel you can't talk to me. Maybe it's a school teacher or somebody like that that you may be able to talk to. So I would just be persistent and consistent in just watching their behavior. And because a lot of people, if you tell them, hey, I'm going to take you to a counselor, then you're going to get that feedback that refusing to go. Oh, you think something's wrong? No, we're just going to go and have this little conversation and just have you checked out a little bit.
Yeah, I know that I was very resistant at first. And then finally, when it was just the time, because I thought, okay, let me give it just another couple days, another couple days. And this went on for like 2 months. And finally, I got to the doctor and they put me on medication. And then the medication was good for a little while, but then it started affecting my abilities to, because I'm a musician and I couldn't play. I couldn't write. I couldn't be creative. The medication sort of killed that part of my brain. And so I got off the medication and then pushed through on my own. And then finally I was okay. So while the medication is good for a lot of people, it's not good for everybody. I want to make that point because the doctors tend to just throw pills at people these days. And I think that that's not always a good thing for everyone. Every case is different. One size doesn't fit all.
I agree with you there, and just as you, I was resistant with with medication. Even after, in the beginning, they wanted me to put me on Zoloft, which was one of the lower forms, and I was like, no, because you've heard so much, researched so much with these medications cause so many different reactions and all that. So I was very resistant with the medicine. And then when I did make the suicide attempt, and I almost succeeded, but God had another plan for me. He cheated death out of taking me, and I'm still here today. But I'm not a medicine taker. But and I'm like you. The one thing that we as society need to understand: there is no magical pill. There is no pill a doctor can prescribe to you that's going to take away depression. It just kind of alters what is the chemicals not balancing and all that. And sometimes it just gives you a little lead way to think past, or a little bit of hope. It gives you something, but it's not going to cure depression. And it takes work. Medication alone, you've got to find, you've got to get some resources. You've got to get a support system. You've got to get a counselor. I'm a firm believer in journaling. Journaling helps a lot. Write out your thoughts, your behaviors, how you feel, walking, exercise, all of that. And I'm not just saying that as, I'm telling you personally what I have to do. Do I still suffer with depression? Yes. Am I on medication? Yeah, I still take some medications because depression is real. It's here. And there is no one thing that's going to cure depression.
It's funny you mentioned journal writing. Years and years ago, a lot of people kept a journal, kept a diary. And I think these days, social media and everyone's phone has replaced that. But I think it's a poor substitute. I really do. I think the actual writing in a book or on a notepad or something like that, I think is much more therapeutic than just going on Facebook. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you agree?
I agree.
Yeah, it didn't, something got lost in that translation for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Julia, we do have to wind this down. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thanks so much for coming on. Your book is called When Depression is Silent, and the book is out now and available?
Yes, it is available on Amazon, Google, Kindle. It's on ebook form, and I do have the book here.
Okay, yeah, hold
And
it
this
up.
is what it looks like. And if you just Google the title, you'll be able to find it.
Okay, great. Do you have a website you want to give out?
No, I'm on Facebook. I don't have the
Oh, you
website
don't have the website.
set
Okay,
up yet.
well, we'll put up your Facebook then on the screen. All right. Well, again, thanks for coming on. It was nice meeting you, nice talking to you, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much. You have a wonderful day.